So I think we'll begin now. Thank you very much. A very good morning, afternoon or evening to you all, and a very warm welcome for today's Making Cities Resilient 2030 webinar entitled Effective International Cooperation to Reduce Tsunami Risk at the Local Level. I'm Asma, Jhina, and I'm the City Resilience and Climate Finance Advisor for the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. I also oversee GCOM's partnership with the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. And you might be aware that GCOM is a network of almost 11,000 cities working towards meeting the climate targets and a just transition around energy. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session, which has drawn a global audience of local government representatives, as well as other parties interested in the issue of reducing the risk from tsunamis. This webinar is organised as part of a global campaign to mark World Tsunami Awareness Day. Tsunamis pose a massive threat to lives, livelihoods, homes, businesses, and a community's overall economic, social, and environmental well-being and resilience. Whilst rare, when they do occur, tsunamis are the deadliest of all hazards. Over the past 100 years, 58 tsunamis have claimed more than 260,000 lives. This is an average of 4,600 deaths per disaster. 6 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly designated the 5th of November as World Tsunami Awareness Day. The General Assembly invited all member states, the United Nations system, international and regional organizations, as well as civil society to observe World Tsunami Awareness Day each year and raise awareness of the risk posed by tsunamis. This year's World Tsunami Awareness Day links with the recent International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction on the 13th of October, which focused on Target F of the Sendai framework. I'm sure many of you know that Target F aims to substantially enhance international cooperation to developing countries for disaster risk reduction. For today's webinar, we will hear from both the global, but more importantly, the local level, with our collection of speakers possessing a wealth of experience, expertise, and perspectives on how best to manage and reduce tsunami risk. We will begin our webinar with a video statement from Ms. Mami Mitsutori, UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. We will then hear from Mr. Emiliano Rodriguez Nuesca, who will introduce his wonderful animation entitled The Girl and the Tsunami, which illustrates the power of local action and tells the story of 12-year-old Martina Maturana, whose prompt action saved the lives of many from a tsunami in Chile. We will then hear from 3 speakers who have direct frontline experience of managing and reducing tsunami risk at the local level. Firstly, Mr. Dan Neely, Community Resilience Manager of the Wellington Regional Emergency Management Office, who will share experience from New Zealand's capital city on its innovative Blue Line to Safety initiative. Second, we will hear from Dr. Rui Angêlo, Director of Prevention and Awareness Raising, Civil Protection of the local government of Cascais in Portugal, who will share the lessons learned from his municipality's development of tsunami early warning system and preparedness plans. And third, we will hear from Setoki Naceta, head boy of Marist Brothers High School in Suva, Fiji, who will share his school's experience of drills and preparedness to protect his schools and its pupils. You might have noticed that you're all on mute at the moment. We have a lot to get through, as I've just mentioned, in the next hour. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we will try and answer them throughout this session. If we don't manage to get through all of them, we will come back to you in due course. With all of that introduction and housekeeping covered, we'll first hear from Ms. Mami Mitsutori, UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction.
This year's World Tsunami Awareness Day on 5 November promises to be special. It is an occasion to celebrate a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reduce tsunami risk around the world. However rare they might be, tsunamis are the single most deadly of all sudden onset natural hazards. Millions of people live and work in tsunami-exposed communities across the world's oceans. After 5 years of marking this day in many unique ways, this year we can announce a major new development. The UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development has the potential to fill capability gaps to speed up the detection and warning for tsunamis even from the near instant that they form. This can only further enhance the preparedness of coastal communities for tsunamis through the Tsunami Ready program of UNESCO IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. The UNESCO IOC Assembly of UN member states has approved the establishment of the Ocean Decade Tsunami Program and a scientific committee to draft a 10-year research, development, and implementation plan for this program. This will be fully supported by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UN agencies, civil protection agencies, and others. In a major boost to international cooperation to developing countries and small island developing states, the Tsunami Program will contribute to the safe ocean outcome of the Ocean Decade by making all communities at risk of tsunami prepared and resilient by 2030. Scaling up the Tsunami Ready program is testament to what focused international cooperation can deliver and will make a significant contribution to reducing risk and saving lives. Only together can we achieve this ambition.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Mitsutori. I think what's very important there is a reminder of how many people are vulnerable to the risk of tsunamis, but also the action that's just been pledged there, which is very, very exciting. Okay, I think we'll move ahead now to Mr. Emiliano Rodriguez Nuesca of Pacifica Creative Risk Communications, who is going to introduce a short animation entitled The Girl and the Tsunami, which tells a profoundly human story of how risk awareness and preparedness saves lives. Emiliano, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Asma, and good afternoon, and good evening, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to present you a very short animated movie that we're about to watch. It's called The Girl and the Tsunami. So picture yourself for a moment on a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific. It's 2010, and Chile is about to experience one of the biggest earthquakes ever recorded, followed by a massive tsunami affecting thousands of kilometers along the Chilean coast, including that tiny island called Juan Fernandez. Everyone is going to sleep on the island and aware of the upcoming danger, but then think for a moment that you're a 12-year-old girl, still getting used to life on the island. She actually considered herself an outsider. She's arrived a few years before that because her father worked in the island. But then she notices something unusual, a shake in the ground, and she reacts on time to literally save her village. So the short film that you're about to watch is the real story of Martina, narrated by the girl herself 11 years after that. She's 23 today. It's an amazing story of a citizen taking the lead to protect her community. And last year, we had the opportunity of interviewing her for a UNDRR podcast. And I remember that night she told us the story over the phone with such a variety of emotions. You will see it in the movie: surprise, fear, anger, pain, joy, sadness. We're so moved. And for those of us who work in risk communications, we are really interested in how those emotions influence the way we perceive risk and how those emotions somehow lead to action. And it's also a good reflection on the power of storytelling, because she, as an adult, now has some perspective with what she's been through. And I wondered, how do survivors sometimes become such great storytellers? Is it because they've been telling the story again and again and again, or is it because they've been through something unique and extraordinary? Or maybe is it because they have a need to share to the world something they learned along the way? In Japan, there's a tradition of post-disaster storytellers called kataribe, and survivors travel all over the country, sometimes for the rest of their lives, to tell others what they've been through, what they learned. And that has immense educational value because important information is transferred. So stories are empathy machines and universal connectors. And also for the survivor, telling the story becomes part of their own healing process. Martina participated in this process, not only as storytellers, but also as part of the creative process of the film. And she told us that she had been interviewed so many times over the years because of what she did, because you'll see she literally saved her village. But this is the first time that she feels part of the process, about the production process, because we've been working with more than 20 artists and animators. And to a few final words, she told us last week when she saw the final movie. She thought, of course, I would never imagine that I would be the main character in a movie. I love the anime. But with some distance, I can tell that I feel proud of myself, proud of what I did. So I leave you with her voice and with her story and the visuals we created with an amazing team of artists. And I'm sure that you will also feel proud of her. Thank you, Andrew, for allowing us to present this story today. Thank you, Bernardo Aliaga at UNESCO and Saskia Carusi at UNDRR for supporting the project and also making it possible. And hope you all enjoy it.
Ese día había salido. Había estado con mis amigas, con mis amigos y nos sentábamos a ver la luna porque estaba la luna súper grande. Todo muy oscuro, todo muy brilloso por la luna. Que me fui para la casa, mis papás estaban viendo el festival. Y yo, chao, me fui a acostar. Y en eso, cuando me estoy quedando dormida, me levanto y le digo así, mamá, es que está temblando la pieza. Y me dice, es que te están las almas malas, te están como penando, que te portáis tan mal. Que yo dije, no. Ya no sé, 2 minutos tenemos una llamada. Y mi mamá se levanta súper rápido, le escucho así como, ¿aló? ¿Papá? ¿Qué pasó? Me dice, Martina, tu abuelo me está contando que hubo un terremoto enorme en Valparaíso. Pusimos como la tele a ver si salía algo. Obviamente no había nada, estaba todo caído. Y en eso es cuando empezamos a sentir como un ruido. Era como cuando estás en la orilla de la playa y el mar se recoge para hacer una ola, pero intensifica así por 1000. Mi papá se va para donde la Capitanía Puerto, entonces dice, váyanse por el camino del Cabrera para arriba y ahí ya deberían estar seguros. Y cuando estaba corriendo, mi mamá no corría. Yo decía, no corre, mamá, corre. Yo pensé en mis seres queridos. Lo único que tenía en ese momento para poder llegar a ellos era tocando el gong. Y yo digo, no, o sea, yo no me voy a ir a donde Cabrera, yo voy a ir a tocar el gong. No iba con zapatos, me enterré un clavo en el pie. Al principio no encontraba el mazo que era para pegarle al gong y de repente como que de película se iluminó y lo agarré y empecé a pegarle. Perdí todo el ambiente. Y ahí salió una persona, está pasando. Ya en ese punto íbamos gritando, levántense, despiértense, hay un tsunami. Empezamos a despertar a la gente. ¿Y qué pasó? ¿Qué está pasando? Tenemos que correr ahora. Ya no podía prácticamente ni respirar y estaba dando un principio de ataque de asma. Y el mar ya estaba ahí, ¿cachai? Teníamos que correr sí o sí. primero como la subida de mar, después fue esta ola y después ya cuando se recogió el mar así completo, que esa fue la que dejó todo el pueblo abajo. Llegamos a literal la punta del cerro. Nosotros habíamos dado por perdido a mi papá. Y en un momento mi papá apareció y subió con nuestra perrita que teníamos. Lo vimos, lo abrazamos. Mi papá destruido, roto. Le dice a mi mamá, no hay nada que hacer, está todo destruido. Todavía no éramos conscientes de toda la gente que se había salvado.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Emiliano, for your introduction and this wonderful animation. I think it's a really, really powerful animation and story to hear from that perspective. I think what's really important that comes out of there is that when these kinds of events happen, telecommunications usually fail, and the importance of one individual sort of stepping aside to do good by a wider community, and the importance of working as a community in terms of responding to these events was really, really striking there. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, in the same vein, we're going to move on a little bit and hear from the front line of local government and the community level from 3 speakers. First, let me introduce Neely, Community Resilience Manager of Wellington Regional Emergency Management Office, to tell us a little more about the approach of New Zealand's capital city to living with tsunami risk. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Daniel Neely. I'm the Manager of Community Resilience here in Wellington, New Zealand. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever it is that you may be. Emiliano, that was really amazing storytelling. So thank you very much. That's something I'd love to share within our own community. What I'm going to share a little bit now is a little bit of our experience and how we have been working with our communities to generate some of their ideas for better tsunami preparedness. And that one of those initiatives is our Tsunami Blue Line initiative. And I'm just going to share that now. So can I trust that everybody is able to see the screen? What I'm going to do is walk you through a little bit of that story from our point of view. So just to move, just make sure I can work this. It's always that little bit of technical. There we go. That should work. So just to kind of set the scene, on the left is New Zealand. We're kind of that, little small Pacific island nation right out there in the Pacific. And on the right is a map of our tsunami risks right around the country. So you can see the different heights and meters around that tsunami risk. Wellington, New Zealand, where I'm talking to you from now, where I work, is at the bottom of the northern part of the North Island, so around that circled blue area there. And the tsunami risk that we have here is because of the plate boundary fault of the Hikurangi Trench, which is along our eastern coast, is basically the same type of tsunami risk that you would see out of the Japanese tsunami back in 2011. And so this is Island Bay, which is one of our little southern communities right on the coast. And in 2010, the Island Bay community really wanted to understand what their tsunami risk was. And as local government, they were asking us, hey, what are you guys going to do to stop tsunami? And our response was pretty much, there's not a lot we can do to stop tsunami, but what we can do is work with you to better understand those risks. And so the map on your right, what you can see is the type of tsunami maps that we have here. And those are 3 different colors, which you can see. The red zone is basically a shore evacuation area. That orange zone is basically the maximum run-up height from a distant source tsunami from somewhere like Chile or Alaska. And that yellow zone is where a tsunami could go if it was a locally generated tsunami, something that was generated from the Hikurangi Trench. So we had this map developed for our whole coastal region. And basically, once that map is generated, our communities wanted to know what the impacts were for them. So what we did, is REMO, which is the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office, where I work, and GNS Science, which is our national science agency. We co-developed and delivered a public presentation about tsunami at a local community center. And out of that, GNS did a presentation of basically what the science was, and I talked about the impacts of what tsunami could be. And this was done in probably about September 2010. And at the end of that presentation, I put a question out to all of the participants. We had about 40, 50 people there in attendance from the community. And we asked them, what are some of your ideas to develop a better way to promote tsunami preparedness? So really going from the position that a lot of the best ideas come from the community themselves, we didn't really try to generate the solution. We opened up with a question. And not surprisingly, because they were invested in their community, we had about 10 or so local community members put their hand up and say, hey, we're keen to work on this with you. We don't have the answers yet, but we're keen to co-design something. And so in that true co-design fashion, we started brainstorming a whole bunch of different ideas. And that group kind of considered a range of local ideas for preparedness. Some were really good, some were not so good. And that's the process of working with community members. We started developing a scope. And my job there was a facilitator, not the person to say, hey, here's what we need to be doing, but really to draw out a range of ideas. We looked at safe locations. For example, where might we evacuate to? If we had to set up a welfare center to look after people. We looked at signage types. And really, when it really started drilling down to what people wanted to know where to go immediately after an earthquake, right? The overarching principle was we want to know where we need to go and not get wet, right? That means we're safe. And so that's really what we started honing in on as far as basically a solution that we were going to come up with together as local government and community. And as part of that process, I've got this quote, and I'll never forget, is when somebody said, wouldn't it be cool if we could just paint a line around the entire suburb that shows the maximum height of where tsunami would go so people can easily know where to evacuate? And when somebody came up with that, everybody's like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? And my role as local government is like, actually, we can do that because local government paints lines on the road all the time. So why couldn't we do that? And so we started really kind of exploring what that idea could look like. And to put it in practice, this is the Island Bay community. This is the tsunami map. And we started looking at what if we just literally got out a can of paint and painted blue lines across the roads that actually showed where that maximum run-up height would go, where those tsunami evacuations are. And the more we really started thinking about it and kind of testing it on other community members, it really made sense. Yes, this would be a really good way to raise awareness. And so we started really looking at what's required to make that happen. But we also got some big concerns by the community, which was, is this type of tsunami signage going to affect our house price, right? Because if you say this is a danger zone, a lot of people were really concerned that could drive down their house prices. So we did a whole bunch of research as well, just looking at other models out there. And not surprisingly, and I'm sure many of you in the audience would see this around the world as well, this type of signage already exists around the world, doesn't drive down tsunami, house prices. And so we had a nice evidence base to go on where we were going to do something new. We really didn't want to, do something that was actually going to damage somebody's biggest investment, which is their house. And so the very first tsunami blue line was painted in February 2011. This is exactly the very first line going down. What we did is, one of the reasons we really like this idea is it really captures people's attention. When they're walking down the street, they can't help but see this big line that stands out, and it makes them realize, like, wait, I didn't even know there was a tsunami safe. We had a tsunami risk here, for example. And so we started painting these along all the major roads across the suburb. Another part of that was also knowing where the local paths were that weren't necessarily obvious, but there were little good evacuation paths that either led up to people's houses or little paths that if people were walking down the street, they could dodge up. So we put these types of signs on the road as well. Another part of that was developing a tsunami information board. So this is the very first one we developed. In that, it had the evacuation zones, the tsunami map, some history of tsunami to highlight that New Zealand had been impacted by tsunami in the past, the type of signage people could see, and basically a really simple message in that orange area, which is basically after a large earthquake, immediately go to higher ground. New Zealand has since come up with the tagline, if it's long or strong, get gone, right? There's a little bit of a catchy phrase to really emphasize that quick and simple message. And then finally, these are members of that working group from the community that participated in this. And they were out there at a local festival, really talking to their neighbors, because while it's important as a professional that people see me out there talking, it's also really important that people see people like themselves out there talking about the importance of this. And so those community members were out there at local festivals talking about this initiative and helping raise that tsunami risk. And so we rolled those out. It was, it caused a whole bunch of media attention. There were plenty of people out there saying, oh, this is nonsense. How can they predict a tsunami, where it's going to go? And so there's always a communications challenge there. But one of the things that was probably most impactful, I must say, is literally 4 weeks later to the day, the Japanese tsunami of 2011 happened. And that skepticism really turned into relief that there was some guidance on the coast. And the skepticism really turned into, hey, when can we get our tsunami lines painted in our community? Because it became a real value add when people realized that we have that same type of risk that was experienced in Japan. We also had that evidence over a period of time that those lines do not affect the housing market. And we really started to get strong interest from communities right across the world, from in New Zealand, the United States, Samoa, Indonesia, and the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, and Japan all expressed interest in the model, because it was a really clean and simple tool, and affordable, because it was just basically a can of paint going across the road that conveyed the way people conveyed a message of that there is a tsunami risk and where people need to go to be safe. Since then, these are examples of the tsunami blue lines painted elsewhere in the state of Oregon, the United States. They've copied the model, as well as other places like Indonesia. And then we're at a stage now where we've been refining the work. So that original tsunami information board that I showed you earlier has evolved into something like this. It has a lot more pictorial elements to it, because we have a really high immigrant population here in Wellington, New Zealand. A lot of people aren't from here, so we try to use pictures to tell the story. We've gone away from those 3 zones because that's kind of confusing. So now it's really just 1 zone, and really highlighting the simple elements of, if you feel either a long or strong earthquake, get gone. So that's the information board on the left. And on the right, this is another kind of build on this initiative, where local residents are identifying those evacuation paths they might have in their backyard. The city council is paying for these little plaques to be put on people's mailboxes to identify that this is private property. You're not allowed to enter unless, if you need access to higher ground, only in the event of the tsunami, you can go up to this path, right? So again, that was another community-driven idea that we as local government, we said, how can we support this? This is a great idea. So we're paying for the plaques, and the community members put those plaques on their mailboxes right across the coast. And so I guess I'm just going to close with this idea that as an emergency manager, my role often is not to be the person with the best idea pushing it down on the community, but to really act as a facilitator to present the challenge, which is, we have a tsunami. We're not going to be building giant walls to prevent tsunami. It's a risk that we have to live with. But what are your ideas to better communicate that risk and to mitigate the efforts of the effects of the tsunami to help people get to a safe place. And so our job is really to help community members turn those good ideas into a reality. And that's an important part of our job. So I'm really interested to hear anybody's questions and other experiences that relate to this. And I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was really interesting to hear. Thank you very much. I mean, for me, what comes out there is just the importance of communities in brainstorming and identifying solutions that will work for them and being engaged in those solutions, but also such a simple and effective blue line to indicate, a really visual way of doing this. And also what's striking there is that this is a solution that we're always looking, when we're looking at civil contingency plans, preparedness, hazards, disaster risk reduction, we're always looking for replicable and scalable solutions that kind of go across nations, cultures, language barriers. And this is something that you've kind of demonstrated has really been able to do that. So thank you very much for sharing that. Really, really helpful. Please use the Q&A chat box for any questions for Dan. Thank you for inviting those questions, Dan, and I'm sure you'll see them coming through shortly. So now we will shift several time zones and move to Europe and the Portuguese coastal municipality of Cascais. Dr. Rui Angêlo is the Director of Prevention and Awareness Raising, Civil Protection for Cascais. Dr. Angêlo, please share the great experience of Cascais in managing your tsunami risk. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, here from Portugal, and good afternoon and good night for people from other parts of the world. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to share our experience. It's also very important for me to say that I'm only one of the persons in the large team that works in this theme. We have people from our team that worked long ago in this issue in Cascais. And we start with a beautiful image of Cascais Bay. This is what we wanted to protect, our view, but also and mainly people's lives. So we are going to start and ask to go to the next slide with a little video. This is our certificate of commitment. This is very important also because everybody in Cascais municipality understands, and mainly our president, that this is a very priority issue for us. And we have an issue also concerning the risk perception. We have a theme that is, it was long ago that we had a huge earthquake in Portugal and in Lisbon and also in Cascais city. But even better for me to speak, it's for you to see a small video that I ask you to put on.
Lisbon, capital city of Portugal, and one of the oldest cities in Europe. But today, remnants of its ancient glories are hard to find. 300 years ago, a very different Lisbon stood on this site, a gilded city at the center of a world empire, until the day disaster struck. Moments before 9:30 a.m. on November 1st, 1755, a sudden sliding movement between two gigantic tectonic plates occurs. The result? A massive magnitude 8.5 earthquake, one of the most powerful in modern European history. 150 miles from the epicenter, the full power of the earthquake strikes Lisbon. Nobody knows exactly how many people were crushed in those first terrifying moments, but time and place would conspire to seal the fate of tens of thousands. Survivors flee towards open ground down by the Tagus River. 150 miles offshore, the earthquake has displaced trillions of gallons of water. It results in a tsunami, which takes less than 40 minutes to reach Lisbon. The tsunami kills hundreds, but in a cruel twist of fate, just before the earthquake strikes, thousands of candles are lit in Lisbon to celebrate the Feast of All Saints. As the waters recede, it's not enough to extinguish the gathering flames that spread. and engulf the city. After earthquake, tsunami, and fire, Lisbon, one of Europe's richest seaports, has been transformed. No more a city of gold, it has become a repository of charred and blackened bones. Lisbon, November.
So this is one of our biggest challenges, is that in Portugal, everybody studied in school this huge earthquake. But as you can see, it was 300 years ago. Since then, we have had mainly one earthquake, but it wasn't so big and only affected a small region in Portugal, and there was no tsunami involved on it. So in my short presentation, I would like to share with you what Cascais have been doing. And we started by a Portuguese university study. That is our orientation in terms of the work that we did afterwards, our tsunami warning system, our evacuation signage, the importance of conducting simulation exercises, our civil protection municipal school, and also a very important issue concerning prevention in terms of building new constructions. So I'll ask you to put the next slide, please. So we started with a Portuguese study, and it's very important for us to do the teamwork concerning scientific studies and universities with technical departments, for instance, from our municipality. We need to have strong scientific knowledge in order for us to be able to do a work that is based on concrete information that is technically validated. So what this study did, and I ask you to put the next slide, please, is to identify our impact zones. Like in New Zealand and all the countries, I guess, were able to have a reference in terms of which street is going to be considered a safe one, which areas, in order for us to learn what type of habitations do we have in these areas. Is it economical buildings like hotels, restaurants? Is it a residence neighborhood with youngsters, with older people, for us to prepare the project concerning the evacuation. Next slide, please. And we also did in this study the identification based by a university study of the meeting points that are saved, the direction that we needed to give people in order to do the evacuation from the risk areas, if it is one direction, dual direction. So all of this was the main step, preparedness concerning the next steps. And the next slide, please. So another important issue was in terms of our Sirens installation. We have to realize which is the acoustic study concerning the range that the Sirens are able to reach. Because the Sirens is one of the methods to warn people of the tsunami imminence, but we had to have another methodologies in order to be complementary. So after this acoustic study, and I ask you to put the next slide, please, what we did, we started our tsunami warning system. We have 3 Sirens in terms of the Cascais Bay that you saw the picture, and they are now ready. And it is the civil protection that has the ability to activate them based on information received by our National Weather Institute. Next slide, please. So this is the evacuation signature that we followed. All the Portuguese cities that have tsunami systems use this signature. It was, for instance, Cascais and Lisbon, that is 2 very close cities, use the same signature. For people from one city going to another city are able to understand the signs. For tourists in Portugal, for instance. And in the next slide, you can see pictures of real signature implementation. They are near our beaches, near the roads, and they are with these signs that we expect people to be able to identify them, and in the real situation are able to identify them quickly and follow the instructions that are on these signatures. The next slide, please. And of course, we have to implement all the Signage, all the systems, but we have to work with people, the preparedness, when it is going to be the day that indeed we have to do the evacuation. This was our last exercise. It was in 2019. It was a European exercise in Portugal with the teams from other countries also. And when we were able to exercise evacuation of our Cascais Bay. Then we start in terms of lessons learned with one of the problems that I'm sure you also have in your countries. Because of the pandemic situation, all the exercises were stopped. And all of us focus on one of the risks, the pandemic risk, but we have to be able to continue working with the other risks because risks are not going to happen once at a time. So exercises are essential for training civil protection agencies, for training with the firefighters, with the police, with lifeguards, and the population, of course. So this is one of our aims, is to do at least 1 year's exercise. Next slide, please. And then we also have another area that we, all of us consider that is very important. It's the awareness increase. We have a civil protection municipal school that in nowadays, because of the pandemic situation, is still closed, but we expect to open it very shortly. And this is a wave tube, water tube, that allow us to show children what is a tsunami. We can show videos, of course, we can speak about it, we can say stories, but when we speak about little children, and an experience is more impacted, has more impact than many of the histories or stories. So we are able in this system to simulate a tsunami, and they are able to see the water moves and the signs and the impact of the tsunami. And this is one opportunity to small children to have them focus on us for at least 5 minutes in order for us to say more instructions that I can do. Maybe one of them can be the future children, like the fantastic movie we saw, that are able to warn their community or their building in terms of the risk of the tsunami that might happen. And the next slide, please. And then we also have another important area that is not very so, we can say it's not very so enthusiastic, like doing an exercise or doing awareness projects, but is at the stage of the urban projects. Every building that someone wants to build in the area that is referenced in our letters concerning to have a tsunami risk, the civil protection technicians do an analysis and they give a technical advice in terms of the measures that must be implemented by the building owner in order to mitigate the tsunami risk. And these, for instance, in terms of hotels that are going to be built in the coast area, are essential to have two emergency processes that are different concerning the fire emergency procedure inside the building. That is the typical one, but you also have to have different procedures concerning the tsunami risk. And for instance, the doors, emergency doors, are totally different if it concerns a building a fire or the tsunami risk. So with this, and you can pass to another slide, please. We wanted to synthetically say that we consider very important to work on all the stages of the emergency management cycle concerning prevention in terms beginning with the building construction, with the risk awareness increase, the preparedness phase in terms of the synalectic, but also the exercises are very important for all the civil agents entities to know what is their role when the day comes, and the emergency management in terms of the rehabilitation. It's also a huge challenge. But to be shortly and to finish, I would like to say that one of the main difficulties is the fact that the last tsunami in Portugal, it was like 300 years ago. So the awareness risk has to be increased for all the people. for the decision makers in terms of the political level, for the technical level, and for the people. That is our main role, of course, is to protect lives, for people to raise their own preparedness in terms of their houses and in terms of their personal lives and with their families. So thank you very much for this opportunity. This is my contacts, and we are available for everything we need in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rui. That's really helpful to understand the comprehensive response, your approach through signage, education, awareness, urban development, and I'm sure that other places who are considering their response will find this really helpful as well, or their preparedness. So thank you very much. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to our third speaker, where we shift back to the Pacific region. Setoki Naceta, head boy of Marist Brothers High School in Suva, Fiji. Please, can you share? Bear with me. Please, can you share with us your experience of how school students can lead efforts to reduce local tsunami risk? So over to you now, Setoki.
Bola Binaka from Fiji. My name is Setoki Naceta from the beautiful islands of Fiji. I've been given this privilege to discuss tsunami preparedness in our school, which is Marist Brothers High School. It is with great pleasure to be part of this live webinar to discuss on some of the practices that would be of great benefit to our coastal urban communities in terms of tsunami preparedness. The location of, as we are all aware that Fiji is a very small island nation in the Pacific, the location of Fiji along the Pacific Rim of Fire makes it vulnerable to tectonic hazards. As a country vulnerable to natural hazards such as earthquakes, which could cause a tsunami, the Fiji government has incorporated the study of natural hazards into the school curriculum. So for Fiji students, we learn about the different types of hazards and how to mitigate against them from as early as primary school. We have been fortunate in that we have not experienced any disastrous tsunamis in recent years. However, our country has been preparing for it in terms of installation of tsunami sirens, organizing disaster management campaigns, of appropriate warning notices along coastlines, and the mangrove replanting programs by communities, corporate bodies, and schools. Marist Brothers High School, which is the school I attend, is located at 3.8 kilometers from the nearest coastline and is the evacuation point for sister school Sacred Heart Cathedral, which is located by the coast. Marist Brothers High School has been involved in a lot of activities towards tsunami preparedness for the last few years. This had allowed the students to participate in voluntary activities towards tsunami preparedness for the last few years. These voluntary activities include the mangrove replanting, adhering to tsunami drills laid forth by the school itself, and with a collective participation in the dissemination of tsunami disaster information. As you can see on the slide, in our school, our major tsunami preparedness program is the mangrove replanting, which has been adopted by the school ever since the first initiative in 2016. The initial mangrove replanting program was a collaboration between our students who were part of the Tsunami Awareness Summit in 2016 and the Forestry Department. The school saw this as a way in which students can contribute responsibly towards the environment, thus the incorporation of mangrove replanting into the school's Education for Life program. This is the Education for Life program. This is a school organized program for our junior students that encourages the learning of life skills. Unfortunately, this project has been on hold since the pandemic hit our shores, but we will definitely continue with the program once we return to normalcy. As you can see on the next slide, the school also looks at social media as one way in which we could reach out to many in terms of tsunami awareness. Therefore, as you can see on the slide, we do also have our Facebook page in which we normally discuss activities that we can do together in line with tsunami preparedness. Thank you. That is all from Marist Brothers High School. Mainly, we usually involve in mangrove replanting. We, the students of Marist Brothers High School, do believe that tsunami preparedness is imperative for the safety and well-being, not only for us in this time and age, but also for the many that will come in the future. In spite of the obstacles that affect these activities from developing, we always press ourselves to the limit just to disseminate vital information as far as tsunami preparedness is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Setoki. Very good to hear about the role that everybody can play in communities in terms of preparedness. I'm not sure there are any specific questions that we need to answer, so I think I might move on to the conclusion and give us a few minutes back at the at whatever time of day it is for you. I think what's been really important in this webinar today, as we kind of reflect on tsunamis, is how they continue to be a very potentially damaging hazard for local communities, and how many vulnerable people there are globally to such hazards, but also the role that local communities play in terms of engaging their communities to identify solutions that are simple and effective. And then we saw from Dan and the Blue Line initiative how some of these solutions can also be scaled and replicated globally. And I think this is the role that MCR 2030 is playing for such kind of disaster risk reduction and preparedness. So as you'll know, MCR 2030 is a long-term global partnership of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and 10 other core partners with experience and expertise in supporting resilient urban development. MCR 2030 supports urban areas to be more inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. It accelerates progress against Sustainable Development Goal 11, as well as other global frameworks, including the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement and the New Urban Agenda. It aims to leave no city behind or alone. MCR 2030 is focused on implementation and action to reduce disaster risk, and this includes managing tsunami risk for those municipalities on the coast and exposed to this deadly hazard. And I hope that you've seen today the importance of the local and the global in terms of disaster risk reduction and the work that MCR 2030 does. So thank you so much for your presentations, for your engagement and for joining this session. I hope you found it incredibly helpful, and please do reach out. We will follow up with a recording of this session and links as well. I know that there's a lot of interest in accessing the information to share with other colleagues, which is absolutely what we would like you to do. And we will follow up with you in due course. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or your week. Thank you.